There is a version of you that no one sees. Not your family, not your closest friends, not even the person who shares your bed. This version lives in the spaces between your words, in the reactions you swallow, in the dreams you wake from but never speak about. It exists in the part of you that you learned to hide so well that even you forgot it was there, but it never left. It has been waiting in the shadows, watching, whispering, trying to get your attention in ways you have been trained to ignore. What if I told you that this hidden version of yourself holds the key to your wholeness, that the parts you pushed away, the feelings you suppressed, the desires you denied, they are not your enemies. They are pieces of your soul that got lost in the process of becoming acceptable, of becoming lovable, of becoming safe. And until you turn around and face what lives in your shadow, you will never truly know who you are. Carl Jung, the revolutionary psychologist who dared to explore the darkest corners of the human psyche, discovered something that changed psychology forever. He found that every person carries a shadow, not the physical shadow cast by light, but a psychological shadow, a repository of everything we could not allow ourselves to be. Every emotion we were told was bad. Every desire we were taught to shame, every part of our personality that did not fit the image we needed to project to survive. And this shadow, Jung explained, does not disappear just because we refuse to look at it. It grows, it gains power, it influences us from beneath consciousness, shaping our choices, triggering our reactions, sabotaging our relationships in ways we cannot understand because we refuse to see the source. Today, you are going to meet your shadow, not through therapy or years of analysis, but through a simple choice. A choice that your unconscious mind will make before your conscious mind even understands why. Owen Hermstring, a contemporary psychologist building on Jung's revolutionary work, developed a test that uses visual symbols to bypass your defenses and speak directly to the hidden parts of your psyche. Before you, you will see 4 different shadows, each one distinct, each one holding a mirror to a different aspect of what you have been hiding from the world and from yourself. The first shadow is sharp and angular, cutting through space with defined edges and aggressive geometry. The second is soft and blurred, fading into the background as if trying to disappear completely. The third is fragmented and broken, pieces scattered like a puzzle that never quite comes together. The fourth is elongated and distorted, stretched beyond recognition into something that no longer resembles its source. Look at these 4 shadows. Do not analyze them. Do not try to figure out what they mean. Instead, breathe deeply. Soften your focus. Let your intuition rise to the surface and ask yourself one simple question. Which shadow feels like mine? Which one stirs something uncomfortable inside me? Which one makes me want to look away? And in that impulse to look away, reveals exactly what I need to see. This is not a game. This is not entertainment. This is shadow work, the practice of bringing unconscious material into conscious awareness so that it can finally be integrated rather than rejected. Jung believed that the shadow is not evil. It is not something to be destroyed. It is simply the unlived life, the unexpressed potential, the aspects of ourselves we sacrificed in order to belong. And when we refuse to acknowledge the shadow, it does not stay quietly hidden. It leaks out. In sudden anger we cannot explain, in attraction to people who embody what we deny in ourselves, in self-sabotage that destroys what we consciously say we want, in projection where we see in others the very qualities we refuse to see in ourselves. So I am asking you now to do something brave. Choose the shadow that calls to you, the one that feels uncomfortable, the one that makes you curious or resistant or strangely defensive, because that shadow is your teacher. It is showing you the version of yourself that has been waiting to be seen, the version that holds power, creativity, authenticity, and wholeness. The version the world cannot see because you have not yet given yourself permission to see it. Make your choice. And then stay with me, because what you are about to discover will not give you easy answers. It will give you truth. And truth, as Jung knew, is the only path to transformation. If your eyes were drawn to the sharp, angular shadow, the one with defined edges cutting through space like blades of controlled aggression, you have revealed something powerful about what you have been hiding from the world. This shadow represents the part of you that is angry, direct, unapologetic, and potentially confrontational. The part that refuses to soften its edges to make others comfortable. The part that wants to speak truth, even when truth burns. The part that is tired of pretending, accommodating, and shrinking to fit into spaces too small for your spirit. If you chose this shadow, you have been taught that these qualities are dangerous, that anger is ugly, that directness is rude. That standing firm in your boundaries makes you difficult. You have spent years, perhaps your entire life, rounding off your sharp edges, softening your voice, swallowing your real opinions, apologizing for taking up space. You learned early that to be loved, you had to be easy, agreeable, flexible, so you pushed your sharpness into shadow. You told yourself it was not who you really are. You convinced yourself that the accommodating version, the one who always says yes, who always makes room for others, even when there is no room left for yourself, that is your true self, but it is not. It is your adapted self, your survival self, your acceptable self, and the anger you have been suppressing, the boundaries you have been afraid to set, the truths you have been too scared to speak. They have been accumulating in your shadow, growing more intense with every year you refuse to acknowledge them. Jung warned about what happens when we deny the shadow too completely. It does not disappear. It erupts suddenly, disproportionately. You find yourself exploding over something small, because beneath that small thing is a mountain of unexpressed frustration. You find yourself attracted to people who are aggressive or domineering because they are living the directness you cannot allow yourself. You find yourself resenting people you claim to love because you keep saying yes when you mean no, and then blame them for not magically knowing you wanted to refuse. This is the sharp shadow's way of trying to get your attention. Through sudden rage, through passive-aggressive behavior, through chronic exhaustion from constantly managing other people's emotions while ignoring your own. But here is what the world does not tell you about anger and boundaries and directness. They are not character flaws, they are forms of self-respect. Anger is information. It tells you when something is wrong, when a boundary has been violated, when you are being treated in ways that do not honor your worth. Directness is clarity. It saves everyone time, energy, and confusion. Boundaries are love. They protect your energy, your peace, and your capacity to show up authentically in relationships. When you suppress these qualities, you do not become kinder. You become resentful. You do not become more loving. You become exhausted. You do not create harmony. You create false peace built on self-betrayal. The sharp shadow is asking you to reclaim your edges, not to become cruel or aggressive, but to become honest, to stop pretending you are fine when you are not, to stop agreeing when you disagree, to stop making yourself smaller so others can feel bigger. This does not mean attacking people or being harsh without reason. It means speaking your truth clearly, setting boundaries without guilt, allowing yourself to feel anger without immediately suppressing it or judging yourself for having it. It means understanding that you can be both kind and direct, both loving and boundaried, both gentle and strong. Owen Hermstring's research shows that people who choose the angular shadow often have a history of being punished for their strength. Maybe you grew up in a family where conflict was dangerous, where expressing anger meant abandonment or retaliation, where being agreeable was the only way to stay safe, so you adapted. You learned to hide your power. But what worked to keep you safe as a child is now keeping you trapped as an adult. The sharp shadow is your invitation to stop performing softness and start embodying wholeness, to integrate the part of you that knows how to say no, that refuses to be diminished, that will not apologize for existing at full volume. If this description resonated with something you have been hiding, subscribe to this channel to continue exploring the depths of your psyche. And in the comments, tell me which shadow you chose. Your honesty might give someone else permission to finally stop hiding too. If your spirit was drawn to the soft, blurred shadow, the one that fades into the background and seems to disappear at the edges, you have revealed something tender and painful about what you have been hiding from the world. This shadow represents the part of you that feels invisible, uncertain, and afraid of being too much. The part that learned to make itself small, quiet, and undemanding. The part that apologizes for existing and constantly asks permission to take up space. If you chose this shadow, you carry a deep fear of being seen fully, of being rejected, of discovering that if people really knew you, they would leave. So you became blurry, undefined, easy to overlook, safe in your invisibility. You have spent your life adapting to other people's needs, preferences, and expectations. You are the person who always asks what everyone else wants before admitting what you want. You are the one who says, "I don't mind," or whatever you prefer. Not because you truly have no opinion, but because you learned that having strong preferences, clear desires, and defined boundaries makes you burdensome. You absorbed the message, spoken or unspoken, that your needs are too much, your feelings are too intense, your presence is too demanding, so you learned to blur yourself, to become vague, to fade into the background where you could not be rejected because you were never fully visible in the first place. This soft shadow is often chosen by people who experienced early rejection, neglect, or conditional love. Maybe you had a parent who could only handle you when you were easy. Maybe you had siblings who took up all the attention, leaving you to conclude that your role was to need nothing. Maybe you faced rejection or abandonment that taught you the devastating lesson that being yourself is dangerous. So you created this blurred version, this accommodating, flexible, low-maintenance version that never asks for too much, never demands attention, never insists on being seen. And for a while this worked. It kept you safe. It made you lovable in a fragile, contingent way. But it also made you exhausted, lonely, and disconnected from your own life. Jung taught that the shadow often contains not just our darkness, but our light. The qualities we pushed away were not always negative. Sometimes we hide our brightness, our passion, our strength, because those qualities threatened people around us. If you chose the soft shadow, you may have hidden your intensity, your creativity, your deep emotions, your bold ideas, your capacity for joy, because when you showed those things, someone made you feel like it was too much, like you were too much. So you learned to dim yourself, to become a softer, safer, more palatable version. And now, years later, you cannot remember what it feels like to exist at full brightness. The problem with blurring yourself is that eventually, even you cannot see yourself clearly. You lose track of what you actually want, because you have spent so long deferring to others. You lose access to your own emotions because you have practiced suppressing them for so long that they feel foreign. You lose your sense of identity because you have been so busy shape-shifting to fit other people's expectations that you forgot what shape you actually are. This creates a particular kind of suffering, not the loud suffering of anger or conflict, but the quiet suffering of absence, of feeling like a ghost in your own life, of watching yourself accommodate and adapt and disappear while some part of you screams to be seen, to be known, to matter. The soft shadow is asking you to come into focus, to define your edges, to stop fading into the background and start taking up the space you deserve. This terrifies you because visibility feels like vulnerability. If people can see you clearly, they can also reject you clearly. But here is what you need to understand. People are already not seeing you, not because they are cruel, but because you are actively hiding. You are rejecting yourself preemptively to avoid the possibility of someone else rejecting you. And this self-rejection is more painful than any external rejection could ever be. Integrating this shadow means practicing visibility. It means stating your preferences even when your voice shakes. It means sharing your feelings even when you are afraid they are too much. It means allowing yourself to have needs, desires, boundaries, and presence without apologizing for existing. It means understanding that being seen is the only path to being truly loved, because love given to a blurred version of you can never satisfy the real you. The soft shadow is your invitation to come out of hiding and discover that wholeness is worth the risk of being seen. If your eyes were drawn to the fragmented, broken shadow, the one that appears in scattered pieces like a puzzle that cannot find its unity, you have revealed something profound about the internal division you carry. This shadow represents the part of you that feels split, contradictory, and impossible to integrate. The part that contains opposing desires, conflicting values, and identities that do not seem to belong to the same person. If you chose this shadow, you know what it feels like to be at war with yourself, to want connection and isolation simultaneously, to crave success while sabotaging your own efforts, to love someone while pushing them away. You feel like different versions of yourself exist in different contexts, and none of them feel completely authentic. This fragmentation often begins in childhood, when you received contradictory messages about who you were supposed to be. Maybe one parent valued achievement, while the other valued humility, leaving you unable to succeed without guilt or fail without shame. Maybe you were praised for being independent, but punished for being distant, creating an impossible bind where every choice felt wrong. Maybe you learned that different parts of yourself were acceptable in different situations, so you created multiple personas, none of which felt fully real. Over time, this splitting became your normal. You stopped even noticing that you show up completely differently at work than at home, with friends than with family, in relationships than alone. And somewhere beneath all these fragments, the real you, the integrated you, got lost. Jung called this phenomenon fragmentation of the psyche, and he considered it one of the most painful forms of psychological suffering. Unlike people who have a clear sense of self, even if parts of that self are hidden, fragmented individuals feel like they are multiple people trapped in one body. You might be responsible and disciplined in your career, but chaotic and impulsive in your personal life. You might be confident and articulate with strangers, but silent and uncertain with those you love. You might present as strong and independent while feeling desperately dependent and needy underneath. These contradictions are not hypocrisy. They are unintegrated aspects of yourself that never learn to coexist. The fragmented shadow also appears in people who experience trauma or environments where survival required splitting off parts of themselves. If expressing certain emotions was dangerous, you learned to disconnect from those emotions entirely. If showing vulnerability led to harm, you created a version of yourself that could never be vulnerable. If being your authentic self resulted in rejection or abuse, you fragmented into acceptable pieces and buried the unacceptable ones so deeply that you can no longer access them consciously. This was adaptive. This kept you alive. But what protected you then is now preventing you from feeling whole. People with fragmented shadows often struggle with decision-making because different parts of themselves want different things. They struggle with consistency because they cannot maintain one way of being across all contexts. They struggle with intimacy because they cannot allow anyone to see all the pieces simultaneously, fearing that the contradictions will be exposed and judged. This creates profound loneliness. Not just the loneliness of not being seen by others, but the more devastating loneliness of not being able to see yourself clearly, of not knowing which version of you is real, of feeling like an imposter in every situation because some part of you is always being left out. But here is what Jung discovered that offers hope. Fragmentation is not permanent. The psyche has a natural drive toward wholeness, toward what Jung called individuation. The scattered pieces want to come together. They are not fundamentally incompatible. They only appear that way because you have been holding them apart, believing that integration is impossible or dangerous. The work of healing the fragmented shadow involves gathering these pieces with compassion rather than judgment. It means acknowledging that you contain contradictions and that contradictions do not make you broken. They make you human. You can be both strong and vulnerable, both independent and in need of connection. Both confident and uncertain. These are not oppositions to be resolved. They are paradoxes to be held. Integrating the fragmented shadow means stopping the internal war. It means creating space for all your parts to exist without demanding that they make logical sense. It means allowing yourself to be complex, multifaceted, and occasionally contradictory without concluding that something is wrong with you. The fragmented shadow is asking you to stop trying to be one coherent story and start embracing the truth that you are many stories and all of them are yours. Wholeness does not mean consistency, it means integration, and integration is possible even when it feels impossible. If your intuition pulled you toward the elongated, distorted shadow, the one stretched beyond recognition until it no longer resembles its source, you have revealed something both powerful and painful about how you have been hiding from the world. This shadow represents the part of you that has been exaggerated, distorted or twisted into something unrecognizable, the part that you have either inflated into grandiosity or deflated into insignificance. The part that cannot exist in its natural proportions because you have been so focused on managing how others perceive you that you lost touch with what is actually true. If you chose this shadow, you know what it feels like to perform a version of yourself that is both more and less than who you really are. This distorted shadow often belongs to people who learned early that their authentic self was not enough or was too much, so they created an exaggerated version. Maybe you inflated your confidence to hide deep insecurity. Maybe you exaggerated your independence to mask a desperate need for connection. Maybe you performed constant happiness to hide profound sadness. Maybe you presented yourself as endlessly capable to avoid revealing that you are struggling. This performance is exhausting because it requires constant vigilance. You can never fully relax. You can never let the mask slip. Because beneath the distorted shadow is the truth you are most afraid to reveal, that you are human, flawed, uncertain, and in need of the very things you pretend not to want. Jung observed that distortion of the shadow often involves what he called compensation. When we feel inadequate in some way, we unconsciously create an opposite external presentation. The person who feels powerless may present as dominating and controlling. The person who feels unlovable may present as aggressively independent, as if they need no one. The person who feels insignificant may present as grandiose, demanding constant attention and validation. These compensations are not conscious lies, they are psychological defenses, ways the psyche tries to protect itself from feeling the full weight of what it fears is true. But defenses are not solutions, they are postponements. And the longer you maintain the distorted shadow, the further you drift from any authentic connection with others or with yourself. People who choose the elongated shadow often struggle with imposter syndrome. You feel like a fraud not because you are lying about your accomplishments, but because the version of yourself you present feels fundamentally false. You might be successful by every external measure, yet feel like you are constantly about to be exposed. This is because your success is attached to the distorted version, not the real you. And some part of you knows that if people saw the real you, the uncertain, messy, imperfect you, they would withdraw their admiration, respect, or love. So you keep performing. You keep stretching yourself into the shape you think others need you to be. And the gap between who you are and who you pretend to be grows wider with every passing year. The distorted shadow also creates problems in relationships. Intimacy requires authenticity. It requires showing up as you actually are, not as you wish you were or fear you are. But when you have been performing for so long, you forget how to be real. You attract people who love the distorted version and then feel unseen when they do not love the real you, which they never had the chance to meet. Or you avoid deep relationships entirely because you know that proximity would expose the distortion. Either way, you end up lonely. Surrounded by people who think they know you but do not. Achieved and successful, but emotionally bankrupt because no one has ever met the person underneath the performance. Jung taught that healing distortion requires what he called deflation of the persona. This is the painful but necessary process of letting the exaggerated version collapse, of admitting that you are not as invulnerable, as independent, as happy, or as confident as you have been pretending to be. This feels like death. It feels like failure. It feels like everything you have built is crumbling. But what is actually crumbling is the false structure. The real you, the proportional you, the human you, has been buried underneath, waiting for the performance to end so you can finally breathe. Integrating the elongated shadow means returning to your natural proportions. It means being willing to be ordinary in a world that demands exceptional. It means presenting yourself accurately rather than strategically. It means accepting that being real will cost you some relationships and some approval, but what you gain is worth infinitely more. You gain the possibility of being truly known, of being loved for who you actually are, of resting in your own skin without constantly managing the gap between truth and presentation. The distorted shadow is asking you to stop performing and start living. Now that you have seen your shadow reflected back to you, now that you have felt the uncomfortable recognition of what you have been hiding, it is essential to understand what this really means. Because shadow work is not about judging yourself for what you have repressed. It is not about shame or self-condemnation. It is about reclaiming the parts of yourself that got lost in the process of becoming who you thought you needed to be. Carl Jung dedicated his life to proving that the shadow is not your enemy. It is your teacher. It is the keeper of everything you need to become whole. Jung discovered that the shadow forms in early childhood as we learn what is acceptable and what must be hidden. When a child expresses anger and is punished, anger goes into shadow. When a child shows vulnerability and is shamed, vulnerability goes into shadow. When a child is too loud, too quiet, too emotional, too intense, those qualities do not disappear. They go underground. They become part of the unconscious, where they continue to influence behavior in ways the conscious mind cannot recognize or control. This is why you find yourself reacting in ways you do not understand, why you sabotage relationships you claim to value, why you are drawn to people who embody the very qualities you deny in yourself. The shadow is trying to be seen. It is trying to be integrated, and until you turn around and acknowledge it, it will keep showing up in your life as projection, reaction, and repetition. What makes shadow work so challenging is that seeing your shadow requires admitting that you are not who you think you are. It requires acknowledging that the version you present to the world, the version you even present to yourself, is incomplete, that beneath your kindness might live anger, that beneath your confidence might live fear, that beneath your independence might live desperate need, that beneath your performance might live profound inadequacy. This is terrifying because we build our entire identity on the conscious persona. We invest decades into becoming someone acceptable, someone lovable, someone successful. And shadow work asks us to deconstruct that carefully built identity and admit that it was always partial. But Jung also taught that the shadow contains not just darkness, but power. The qualities you repressed were not all negative. Sometimes you pushed away your creativity because it felt too impractical, your passion because it felt too intense, your ambition because it felt too selfish, your joy because it felt too frivolous, your strength because it felt too threatening. These are not flaws, these are gifts, and when you reject them, you do not just become more acceptable, you become less alive. You become a diminished version of yourself, operating at half capacity, wondering why life feels muted and why you feel chronically unfulfilled. It is because half of you is locked in shadow, unavailable for your conscious use. Integrating the shadow is not about becoming your shadow. It is not about acting out every repressed impulse or indulging every hidden desire. It is about bringing unconscious material into conscious awareness so that you can choose how to express it maturely. If your shadow contains anger, integration does not mean becoming aggressive. It means learning to set boundaries and speak truth. If your shadow contains need, integration does not mean becoming clingy. It means learning to ask for support and receive care. If your shadow contains power, integration does not mean becoming domineering. It means learning to lead with integrity and occupy space without apology. Jung called this process individuation, the journey of becoming fully yourself by integrating all aspects of the psyche. It is not easy. It requires brutal honesty. It requires sitting with discomfort. It requires admitting that you have been wrong about yourself in fundamental ways. But the alternative is remaining fragmented, performing a partial self, and wondering why nothing feels quite real. The shadow you chose today is your starting point. It is showing you what wants to be integrated first, what needs your attention most urgently, what has been waiting longest to be seen. So the question is not whether you have a shadow. Everyone does. The question is whether you have the courage to turn around and look at it, to stop running from the parts of yourself you have been taught to fear, to stop pretending you are only the light when you are also the darkness, to stop presenting a polished version when wholeness requires acknowledging the mess, because on the other side of this terrifying honesty is something extraordinary. Not perfection, not the absence of flaws, but integration, wholeness, the profound relief of being fully yourself without constant performance or vigilance. This is what the shadow offers, not comfort, but freedom. So now you know your shadow. You have seen the version of yourself that the world does not see, the part you have been hiding, denying, or distorting. But awareness without action is just intellectual understanding. Real transformation happens when you take this knowledge and apply it to your actual life. When you stop analyzing your shadow and start integrating it. When you move from insight to embodiment, because shadow work is not a one-time revelation, it is a daily practice. A commitment to bringing consciousness to the parts of yourself that want to remain hidden. If you chose the sharp, angular shadow, your practice is to reclaim your right to have edges. Start small. The next time someone asks you to do something you do not want to do, say no. Do not soften it. Do not apologize. Do not explain. Just no. Notice what happens in your body when you do this. Notice the fear that rises. Notice the guilt. Notice the voice that says you are being selfish or difficult. That voice is not truth. It is conditioning. Your work is to distinguish between the two. Practice stating your opinions clearly, even when they differ from the group. Practice letting yourself feel anger without immediately suppressing it. Write it down. Move your body. Let the emotion have space without acting it out destructively. This is how you integrate the sharp shadow, not by becoming cruel, but by becoming honest. If you chose the soft, blurred shadow, your practice is to come into focus. Start by naming what you want, not what you think you should want, not what would make everyone else happy. What you actually want. Say it out loud. Write it down. Tell one trusted person. Notice how vulnerable this feels. Notice the impulse to immediately qualify or soften your desire. Resist that impulse. Let your want exist without apology. Practice taking up space physically. Sit without making yourself small. Speak without diminishing your voice. Exist without fading into the background. This will feel uncomfortable. That discomfort is not a sign you are doing something wrong. It is a sign you are doing something new. Your work is to tolerate the discomfort of visibility until it becomes familiar. If you chose the fragmented, broken shadow, your practice is to create internal dialogue between your parts. Get a journal and let different aspects of yourself write to each other. Let the responsible part speak to the chaotic part. Let the strong part speak to the vulnerable part. Do not try to force resolution, just let them coexist on the page. Practice staying present when contradictory feelings arise. You can feel both excited and anxious, both loving and resentful, both confident and uncertain. You do not have to pick one, you can hold both. This is integration, not the elimination of contradiction, but the capacity to contain paradox. Notice which contexts bring out which parts of yourself. Start slowly introducing aspects of yourself into spaces where they have been hidden. Let your work colleagues see a glimpse of your playful side. Let your family see your serious, thoughtful side. This is how you begin to weave the fragments back together. If you chose the elongated, distorted shadow, your practice is to tell the truth about yourself. Start with one person you trust. Tell them one thing you have been exaggerating or hiding. Tell them you are not as confident as you seem, or as independent, or as happy, or as capable. Notice what happens when you drop the performance. Notice if the relationship deepens, or if it reveals itself to be built on the distorted version. Both outcomes are useful information. Your work is to slowly deflate the exaggerated persona and allow your natural proportions to emerge. This means admitting when you do not know something, asking for help, showing uncertainty, revealing struggle. It means being ordinary, imperfect, and human. This will feel like failure at first, because you have been conditioned to believe that your worth lies in being exceptional. But real connection, real love, real peace, these things do not come from performance, they come from authenticity. Shadow work is uncomfortable. It brings up shame, fear, grief, and resistance. There will be days when you want to go back to hiding. When the effort of integration feels too exhausting. When performing the acceptable version seems easier than being the whole version. In those moments, remember why you started. Remember that the life you are living right now, the one built on hiding and performing, is not actually easier. It is just familiar. And familiar is not the same as fulfilling. The shadow is asking you to choose wholeness over comfort, truth over acceptance, integration over performance. This is the path Jung called individuation, and it is the only path that leads home to yourself. You have walked through a doorway that most people spend their entire lives avoiding. You have looked at your shadow, the version of yourself that the world cannot see because you have worked so hard to keep it hidden. The sharp edges you softened, the blurred presence you faded into, the fragments you could not integrate, the distortions you performed to manage how others perceive you. You have seen the truth that lives beneath the version you present, and now you know something that changes everything. You are not who you have been pretending to be, but you are also not who you feared you were. You are something far more complex, more powerful, and more whole than either extreme. Carl Jung spent his entire career trying to communicate one essential truth: that psychological health is not about being good, being perfect, or being only light. It is about being whole. And wholeness requires acknowledging every aspect of yourself, including the aspects you were taught to reject. The shadow is not your enemy. It is the part of you that got left behind when you learned to adapt, to perform, to become acceptable. And it has been waiting, sometimes for decades, to be seen, acknowledged, and brought back into conscious awareness where it can finally be integrated rather than suppressed. Each shadow you met today represents a different way of hiding. The sharp shadow hides anger, boundaries, and directness beneath forced agreeability. The soft shadow hides presence, desire, and intensity beneath strategic invisibility. The fragmented shadow hides wholeness beneath contradictory personas that cannot coexist. The distorted shadow hides authentic proportions beneath exaggerated performance. None of these hiding strategies are wrong. They were adaptive. They kept you safe in environments where being fully yourself was dangerous. But what protected you then is now imprisoning you, and the work ahead is learning to distinguish between actual danger and the old fear that no longer applies. Owen Hermstring's research, built on Jung's foundation, proves that shadow work is not optional for people who want to live fully. It is essential. Because the shadow does not stay quietly hidden, it influences every relationship you enter, every choice you make, every reaction you have. The anger you suppress becomes passive aggression or sudden rage. The need you deny becomes clinginess or isolation. The power you hide becomes either grandiosity or self-sabotage. The contradictions you cannot integrate become internal chaos and external inconsistency. You cannot outrun your shadow. You can only turn around and face it, and when you do, something miraculous happens. The thing you feared would destroy you, if acknowledged, actually becomes the key to your wholeness. So what will you do with what you have learned today? Will you go back to performing, hiding, fragmenting, and distorting? Or will you take the first small step toward integration? Will you let one person see one real thing about you? Will you speak one truth you have been swallowing? Will you set one boundary you have been avoiding? Will you admit one feeling you have been denying? These small acts of honesty are how shadow work happens. Not in grand dramatic revelations, but in daily choices to be real instead of acceptable, to be whole instead of perfect, to be human instead of performing humanity. Remember, you are not your shadow, but you are also not complete without it. The version of you that the world sees is only half the story, and the version living in shadow is the other half. Integration does not mean becoming your worst qualities. It means bringing them into consciousness so you can express them maturely. So your anger becomes advocacy. Your need becomes connection, your power becomes leadership, your contradictions become complexity. This is individuation, this is wholeness. This is what it means to finally come home to yourself after years of living in exile from your own truth. Which shadow did you choose today? The sharp, the soft, the fragmented, or the distorted? And what did it reveal about the version of you that has been waiting to be seen? Share your experience in the comments below. Your courage to name your shadow might give someone else permission to finally stop hiding theirs. And subscribe to this channel for more explorations into the depths of the psyche, the uncomfortable truths that lead to transformation, and the journey of becoming fully, courageously, authentically yourself. There are 2 more videos appearing on your screen now. Choose one to continue this journey into self-discovery. Because shadow work is not a destination, it is a practice. A lifelong commitment to seeing yourself clearly, accepting yourself fully, and living with integrity rather than performance. Until we meet again, keep turning toward your shadow. Keep asking the uncomfortable questions. Keep choosing truth over comfort. The version of you that the world cannot see is not your shame, it is your power, and it is time to bring it into the light.